It's picked up. Stroud right down the middle. Touchdown.
Running play. Henderson hits the sideline. Travion Henderson hitting him like a slow bullet. 41 yards. Toy Stroud winds up, throws a deep ball sideline. Caught. Touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr.
It's time to talk Big Ten football on the Our Lads Football Network, and can't get any bigger than this. Ohio State, the Buckeyes are now in a situation that they haven't been in quite a long time, Kevin. As Kevin Noon joins me from BuckeyeHuddle.com. How are the fans feeling about the season, Kevin?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of nervousness. I mean, it's been a minute since Ohio State has not won the Big Ten in back-to-back years, losing to the team up north. But there's a lot of excitement. But again, new faces in some key places with a new quarterback, 3 new linemen on the offensive line. So we're not far off from the season getting underway. And I think then once people see these guys in action, I think that maybe some of the fears will subside.
Yeah, let's before we take a look at the depth chart, what I want to do is take a look at, first of all, this is your Twitter handle. What's the deal with this picture?
Yeah, I was at a barbecue academy in Georgia, and those were a couple of the instructors right there. And you know, once you turn 50, you really have to get involved in something, and I'm too poor for golf, so I decided to get into. I bought myself a smoker, and I don't get to do it as often as I would like because, well, while golf may be expensive, so is the cost of meat. So I still really enjoy doing that with maybe a beer or two in my hand and some tunes on the radio.
I like it. That's I think yeah, I could see the comparison to golf and cooking, and it makes a lot of sense. It's good that you're doing one of the two. All right, yeah, that's something that I'll have to figure out, but I need something like that in my life as well. Let's check out BuckeyeHuddle.com. So you've now been with them for over a year?
It's been about a year. Yeah, I came in about a couple weeks after the site was launched. It's a team of industry veterans that we all came together to create a site, and I'm mostly involved in the audiovisual product. So getting on a podcast like this is nothing new for me because that's what I do kind of for a living. But you know, we cover recruiting, we cover the team, we have it all in a great community over at BuckeyeHuddle.com.
And this picture here, because this is what everybody wanted to. This was, I guess, as big as a story as the Buckeyes can have during camp, was the change at quarterback with CJ Stroud now in the NFL. And so now Kyle McCord was named the starter, which I don't think was a big surprise. But we're hearing now that Brown will place him in the game. So what does that tell us? Anything, behind, anything interesting behind that? Or is that just, maybe if we're blowing him out, we're not going to say that, but maybe if we're blowing him out in the second half, Brown will play. That's all that means.
No, I think we will see Devin Brown more involved in the game. I think one of the shortcomings that Ohio State has had during the Ryan Day era has been playing the first team quarterback maybe a little bit longer than he should. Now, he's also sent a lot of guys to New York to be Heisman finalists, and there's an F around and find out type of grid for that. You need to play a lot of football if you're going to be considered for all of that. So by the time that you bring in your backup and Ohio State gets up big in a lot of its games, let's just be real, and you're not running the offense, you're just trying to get off the field and be done with the game because you're up 5 touchdowns. They're going to try and get away from that this year because let's just play hypothetical. Ohio State has a special season. Kyle McCord is draft eligible after this year, so he could be a one and done. We know that one and done type of quarterbacks don't translate very well to the league, but everybody's got to come to their own decision. But this is an opportunity to make sure that Devin Brown, who still has one more year of quote-unquote club control, has some experience, so we're not sitting here 365 days from now having the same conversation, but just replacing the name Kyle McCord and putting in Lincoln Keenholz, who will probably be the number 3 quarterback for Ohio State. So both quarterbacks are going to see playing time. No, it's not going to be a case of McCord having a short leash. Oh, you threw a pick, we're pulling you, we're benching you. But I think that Ryan Day probably would like to get Devin Brown some first half action. And even if he doesn't, I think if he puts him in the second half, it's going to be still with Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, guys like that out there. So he's running the actual playbook.
So it sounds like they're expecting big things then from McCord.
I think so. And it was a close battle all along. And I think that has more to do with Devin Brown maybe being a little better than expected, than Kyle McCord being a little bit worse than expected.
Okay.
Everybody wants to go in and say, well, if one guy couldn't pull away from the other, that's an indictment on the people that you had there. And I say, well, if you have 2 guys running world record paces, and somebody has to lose the race.
Yep.
So I think it's more of that. Now, I will caution people and say, don't expect Kyle McCord or Devin Brown to come out there and be a complete CJ Stroud product. That's just not how it's going to be. CJ Stroud took 2 years to get to where he was, and he's still going to have to do some things better in the league. And, God bless him with the Texans. He's probably going to have some pretty tough lessons on a team that is not quite competitive yet. But I think that both these guys will be able to come out and run the offense, but people will have to have a little bit of patience because they are guys that have very little experience in the college game.
Well, as far as the skill positions that either quarterback will be using, you can't have much better than this. This is as good as it gets in all of college football. Henderson Williams in the backfield as the 1-2, Egbuka, Harrison Jr., and then Fleming. I mean, those 5 guys right there, and then throw in Stover 6, a tight end. The Buckeyes are loaded there. So I wouldn't need to rehash. I'm sure everybody knows about these guys, but let me ask you some other questions. Who is the number 1 guy? Is it Harrison or Egbuka?
It's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr., honestly. I mean, he's the guy that is on the Heisman odds boards. He's the guy that I think a lot of people feel that he was robbed of the Biletnikoff Award to going to the nation's top receiver. He's the guy. Now, I've seen certainly through all the metric sites that he's won, but Emeka Egbuka I've seen as 3 or 2. And we're not talking receivers in the Big Ten. I'm talking receivers in the nation. That's just how much of a 1-2 punch that Ohio State has. So, you have an outside guy and you have a guy who can play inside in Emeka, but Emeka can play outside as well. It's going to give the Buckeyes a lot of opportunities, but I really think that the biggest thing is the question that should be asked is who's the number 3 guy? Because if you don't have that number 3 guy, teams are going to bracket Harrison, and then you kind of lose some options there. Julian Fleming is somebody who has been injured since the end of his high school career. Former 5-star recruit. He has the talent. He certainly has the talent. He has just not had the luck in terms of injuries. He talked about during interviews a couple weeks ago about just the shoulders, and there have been times that he couldn't raise his arms above his shoulders, and well, how do you catch the ball? Well, you just have to kind of figure it out. He's saying that he is healthy and ready to go. You have Xavier Johnson, who is going to be wearing the Block O jersey, kind of that hybrid running back receiver. He's somebody who I think could see some time on the inside, but keep an eye on Carnell Tate. Ohio State's recruiting class of 2023 at wide receiver was the best in the nation. I will fight anybody who says otherwise. But Carnell Tate is somebody that Marvin Harrison Jr. came out and said, and this is a pretty close quote, that Carnell Tate is further along now than Marvin Harrison was going into his sophomore season. Wow. Remember, Carnell is just a true freshman.
Yeah.
And Carnell Tate has gone through a lot of things. I mean, the tragic loss of his mother in a shooting in Chicago. and everything else. And I'm not taking away things from the remainder of the class with Brandon Ennis, Bryson Rogers, Noah Rogers, but Carnell Tate seems to be the guy that is closest to game ready, having enrolled early, having spring practice. And I think we could see him as an option out there as well.
Okay. And then we talk about, of course, the two big-time running backs, Henderson and Williams. But I don't know if we've seen they've done, both of them, some incredible things so far. I don't know if we've seen, or maybe we won't see because they share the carries, some just Heisman-type season. Who has the biggest upside?
I think Trevion Henderson, and that's no slight to Mayan Williams, but Mayan Williams is that bowling ball, low center of gravity. I'm not really going to run away from you, but you're going to make a business decision after the 10th time you tried to tackle me that you don't want to tackle me anymore. Trevion Henderson can be shot out of a cannon at times with the way that he can accelerate and get from like second gear to fifth gear. Remember, both of these backs were injured for large parts of last season. Trevion Henderson got hurt in the Notre Dame game in week 1. Mayan Williams was hurt multiple times. Trevion Henderson did not play in the Peach Bowl, the national semifinal game. Mayan Williams came in and only had a couple of snaps. He was injured for a lot of the lead-up practices. So, I mean, Ohio State was really thin last year to the point of having to move Chip Trayanum from linebacker to running back. And remember, Chip Trayanum played running back in high school. He played running back at Arizona State. He came to Ohio State to play linebacker, and they had to move him. They lost Evan Pryor prior to the season, no pun intended there. So, I mean, they have a lot of depth with these 5 guys, but I will say that just with the physical demands of the position, you need to be 4 or 5 deep. But I think that all things being equal, Trevion Henderson is the guy that I think that right now for the 23 season, not looking ahead to 24 or whatever for somebody like Dallin Hayden or Evan Pryor, I think he's the one that can be the biggest difference maker.
Okay. And then Chip would still be the number 3 guy.
Yeah, I think Chip is the number 3 with Dallin Hayden hot on his heels, and then with Evan Pryor probably 5. And a lot of that too has to deal with the fact that Evan Pryor has been out for a year. And so much of recovering from an injury is not only physical, but it's mental too. I got hurt. I mean, I don't want to get hurt again. Do you do something different? You pull something in the right side of your body, and then suddenly your left side hurts because you're overcompensating.
Yes.
So there's certainly a mental aspect there, but I do think that there is probably a pretty decent gap from 2 to 3. But just, as we're talking about guys below the 2 line, remember, Dallin Hayden helped Ohio State win the game at Maryland. He had a couple of touchdowns, rushed for over 100 yards, and it's because he was thrust into service because Ohio State had no healthy bodies, to be honest. So even if Ohio State has to call on 3, 4, or 5, I think all 5 of these guys are very competitive on a Big Ten level.
Okay, so, but if Williams and Henderson leave, which I guess they probably will after this year, I'm just guessing, do they have someone on the roster right now, or a freshman, or maybe someone next year's class that you say, okay, this might be the next guy?
I really think Dallin Hayden can be the guy, and that's no slight of Evan Pryor. Evan Pryor is a tremendous, I kind of call him more of an all-purpose back because I think he's such a great pass catcher, and we've not really been able to see that. Evan Pryor saw a little bit of playing time as a true freshman, but it was obvious with North Carolina not playing high school football his senior year. He was just undersized and under strength. So we've not seen any of Evan Pryor's real ability, in my opinion. Ohio State has 3 running backs committed to the class of 2024. So we will see a restocking of the pantry because realistically they could lose 3 backs. They could lose Williams, they could lose Henderson, and they could lose Trayanum. So I think that Hayden would go into 24 potentially as the favorite, but we know that the days of the bell cow running back, 32 carries in a game, those are gone.
Yep.
You had running backs not that long ago who were like, I don't want to go there because I want to be the guy. Running backs now, and I cover recruiting as well, are saying the right things. I don't want all the tread off my tires by the time I get out of college. I'm fine sharing the load. Yes, I want to be the guy. Yes, I want to be the guy there on the most critical and crucial plays, but I don't need 30 carries a game to show how tough I am.
Okay, so then the offensive line and all that sexiness with the skill position guys can't function without a really good offensive line, and Ohio State has prided themselves on a very good offensive line. How did they do last year when all was said and done, and how do they look this year?
I think the offensive line did pretty well last year. I mean, they were up. I think they made it to like the semifinal level of the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the nation's top offensive line. They didn't make the final cut. The biggest concern that I had last year is that the run blocking maybe was not up to snuff.
Okay.
And again, I think, that it takes two to tango, and the running backs were hurt. So if you don't have that great first step, if it doesn't matter if are you getting hit a yard in the backfield, or are you getting pushed to be able to get a couple of yards and then you're getting pulled down. Ohio State has not been very good for the last couple of years on 3rd and short or 4th and short. And when it does, it has to pass. The run has not necessarily been there. So it is a little bit of an indictment, I think, on the offensive line run blocking. But this is another year in the system. Justin Fry took over for Greg Studrawa a couple of years ago. So he's still working on making this offensive line his. But going into this year with 3 new starters at both tackles and at offensive center, there is going to be a lot that has to be kind of sped up to get up to game speed. And I think they got the dudes to do it, but sitting there and looking on paper is very different than what you're going to maybe see in game 1.
Okay, yeah, because Donovan Jackson, Matthew Jones. So those are the 2 studs that are coming back. Who has the biggest upside of the 2?
I think in terms of upside, it's Donovan Jackson. I think Matt Jones, who's been there forever and a day, is steady, and you know what you're going to get from him, and he's somebody else that gives you another potential backup offensive center. Part of the agreement of coming back, it's my understanding, was that he was told that he would play guard, though. I think that that's what he projects at the next level. So let's play the right position. Let's not play center when the scouts are already saying that you're going to be a guard. Donovan Jackson is somebody, as a redshirt sophomore, that he has shown a lot of ability. He is still getting better. I think with Matt Jones, we're getting closer to what he is and what he can be. Okay. I think we haven't necessarily seen all of that with Donovan Jackson, but it is coming along well. And you're right that the 2 offensive guards, those are the known commodities on the offensive line, and where people are going to have their attention drawn to, even though we know what the Cadillac position on the offensive line is, and that's left tackle.
Yeah, and how's that looking right now at both tackle spots, actually? Are they looking, nervous, or is the San Diego State transfer, is he going to get a chance to play?
Yes, Ryan Day on Tuesday announced after some prodding what his line is going to look like for game 1. Your left tackle is going to be the San Diego State transfer, Josh Simmons. Your right tackle is going to be Josh Fryer, and your offensive center is going to be Carson Hinsman. Your backup on Carson Hinsman is going to be Victor Cutler, the transfer from Louisiana Monroe. I would also keep an eye on true freshman Luke Montgomery to see some time at offensive tackle. He has done more than enough this fall camp and going in here into game week to probably be considered your 3rd tackle. And maybe he ends up, when Ohio State runs its Bison package and puts an additional offensive lineman / tight end in the 41 jersey, that could be Luke Montgomery who fills that role. But I know a lot of people have been very critical of Josh Simmons, the San Diego State transfer, because they look at his tape or they look at his numbers, or PFF really did not have glowing numbers for Josh Simmons. But I warn people that we're talking about offensive line. We're talking about a unit that moves as one. It's not necessarily all about offensive, one player's play. It's about the play of 5 guys. So I think that Josh Simmons has done a lot there. And I think that the fact that they felt comfortable to move Josh Fryer, who was in the Bison package, who was number 41 at times last year, right tackle shows the confidence that they have in Simmons. Now, if Ohio State goes out and gives up 3 sacks against Indiana, people are going to be like, well, I was told that this offensive line was a lot better. Well, it's game 1 of year 1 for the 3 of these guys in terms of being Ohio State starters. So Rome wasn't built in a day, but Ohio State does have the nice situation of going against an Indiana team that only had 20 sacks last year, who really had to hit the transfer portal to kind of fill in some gaps, and then games against Youngstown State and Western Kentucky. They've got 3 games that probably are not going to be the toughest 3 on their schedule before they go and travel to Notre Dame week 4, which will be one of the more name brand games on their schedule.
Moving on over to the defensive side, and matter of fact, so far, Simmons is the only transfer or true freshman, new face, that will start on offense. And on defense, I'm not sure that there is one. Maybe you'll update that for me the way you did with Simmons. But does Ohio State run a 4-2-5 now?
Ohio State does run a 4-2-5. And to your earlier point, Carson Hinsman is not. I mean, he is a redshirt freshman, so he's new, and so he has no playing experience really either. I mean, maybe he was involved in some point afters or whatever, but I would consider him a new player as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we are going to see some new faces, because here's the thing: we get really caught up on who's the starter. I'm not as concerned about who plays play 1. I care about who's going to play on the most critical of plays. And I think we're going to see good rotation in terms of what the defensive line looks like. I think we're going to see a lot of rotation in terms of the defensive backfield. I think we're going to see times in this 4-2-5. Normally it's 3 safeties and 2 corners. They consider their nickel a safety, but there are going to be times that they might trot a corner out there to the nickelback position as well. So, and one other point too is I think we're going to see more rotation at linebacker with them playing the 2 linebackers. Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers play a ton, and Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, has come out and said we need to rotate a little bit more. So keep an eye on that rotation as we kind of go through positions. I can get into that one a little bit more as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, if I look at this defense, and there's a lot of stars, a lot of impact players. We'll start up front, and who are the big boys? Who are the big dogs that are going to be looked at as premium draft picks in the NFL real soon?
I think it starts with JT Tuimoloau, the defensive end. I think we all can sit there and remember the Penn State game last year where he had 2 interceptions. One, he returned for a pick 6. He forced a fumble. I mean, he single-handedly changed that game, as it was a very close game going into the third quarter. For parts of the third quarter, playing in State College, it looked like Penn State might outlast Ohio State, and then Tuimoloau goes nuts, and Ohio State ends up winning that game going away. I think that Jack Sawyer is another name. He's not going to play the jack this year. He's going to play more of the traditional defensive end position. I think he's somebody that could have a huge impact. I keep an eye on Kenyatta Jackson, who will also play defensive end. I think that he is somebody that has been mentioned with the same kind of notes and the same type of regularity as Tuimoloau and Sawyer. So I think he's really your 3rd defensive end. When it comes to the jack position, keep an eye on Mitchell Melton. He is a guy who was hurt all last year, but he is your number 1 jack. But the question is we love to fall in love with this new position name, and the jack position itself isn't a new position. Viper, I mean, it's called the Leo. It's called everybody has new names for the wheel, but it's still the wheel. And so don't get too caught up in that. But Mitchell Melton is going to be the guy that could be there. I think that CJ Hicks is somebody that could maybe play some jack as well, but he's truly a linebacker. And then moving interior on the line, Michael Hall Jr. is somebody that is really good. You just have to keep him healthy. And Michael Hall, when he's healthy, is unblockable largely, but he just really was not able to play a lot last year. Tyleik Williams is somebody who he can play very well when he is at his top end. Weight concerns have kind of been something that's been part of his career. Tywone Malone, a transfer from Ole Miss, is somebody that I think will be right in there in the mix. I think he'll get just as many snaps as Hall and Williams. And then you also Ty Hamilton as somebody who I think could be very solid as well. So I feel that they are not only just strong in a two deep. I think that even if you get down to somebody like Hero Kanu or Jaden McKenzie on the third team, Ohio State certainly has a lot of guys. But I know for my money, when the chips are down, that I would want to see 51 and 91 out there, which is Hall and Williams. Those are the guys that I would consider your premier interior linemen.
Okay. And moving on to linebacker. So Eichenberg, he's the man running the show in the middle. You've seen a lot of really good Ohio State interior linebackers, especially right up the middle. How does he rank?
I mean, here's part of the issue with his legacy is that he's not a prolific talker. I mean, he is your throwback. He grunts when he answers. I mean, and even the coaches, even Jim Knowles has commented on that. He just grunts, and that's how he kind of communicates. So it's kind of, football meathead. Well, Tommy's much more insightful than that, but that's just how he communicates. So he is not necessarily going to have the notoriety of a James Laurinaitis or some of these other great linebackers that have played in the last 10, 15 years at Ohio State, but he makes plays. And I think that that's going to be very important. But if you would have told me 3 years ago that Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers were going to be the starting linebackers, based on who Ohio State had recruited through the years, a lot of 4 and 5 stars, a class or two ahead of them or at the same time, I would have questioned you. But all they do is go out there and make plays. So I think both of them should be remembered fondly once they get through with what's going to be their final seasons as redshirt seniors.
Okay, and then we take a look. And by the way, Cody Simon is another name too that on a lot of teams would be getting a considerable amount of playing time. So is he still definitely in the mix?
And that's part of the plan, is to get both Simon and CJ Hicks out there to rotate a little bit more. And then what happens, there are not going to be a lot of opportunities, in my opinion, for Ohio State to play 4-3. They're going to be 4-2-5 most of the time. They have Wisconsin on the schedule, but Wisconsin all of a sudden now is not a downhill running team since Luke Fickell comes in and they change everything up and bring in Tanner Mordecai, a quarterback. So, I think Simon would be your Sam if you were running a 4-3 in a lot of instances, and he would be there. But don't sleep on CJ Hicks. He's one of these guys when you talk about, we got to get our best 11 out there. Is CJ Hicks worthy of being in that best 11 conversation? I think so. But it's really hard to take Steele Chambers off the field with everything that Chambers has done, and Chambers has been in the program for a long time. And even though not all of that time has been as a linebacker, it's long enough that he can be out there too, along with Tommy and captain the defense. So I think linebacker is still a position that Ohio State is a little thin in terms of numbers at. You got Gabe Powers, who might be a tweener between end and linebacker. You've got Reed Carrico, who comes from a small school in Ohio, which the transition process for him has been positive, but it's still been lengthy. And then they got some young bucks, but maybe they're not as deep at linebacker as some other positions, but you're going to have to sit there and pull Tommy off the field kicking and screaming if you want to get him off the field. Let's not forget that he didn't have any thumbs last year. Like, both of his thumbs were broken and taped up and everything else. I mean, he just played through, and it wasn't necessarily a case of, we don't have anybody else. It was Tommy is still our best option.
Yeah, it sounds like an old school NFL interior linebacker. So he's going to, I'm sure, enjoy an NFL career. Okay, and then that secondary. So Burke has been the name that we've heard since he stepped on the field day one. Is he still like the premier top talent of the secondary?
I think it's between Burke and Jordan Hancock. I think the two of them are very important for what the plans are, and I think both of them have had huge off seasons, as have Ole Miss transfer Davison Igbinosun. He's really in the mix too. I think that we're seeing a case of where Ohio State could rotate 3 corners for 2 positions. And I mean, how does that work out with all of that? I mean, and again, too, you could sit there and play a corner at nickel. I mean, I think they've got a lot of options there. Let's not forget Burke and Hancock both were dealing with injuries last year. Both came out and just had, some immediate issues. And corner is a position where you have to have a short memory. And if you come out of the gates and have a bad start, it's hard to close ground. So I think corner will be interesting to see how it works out. But I think between the three of them, they're in pretty good shape. And is this going to be like are shades of Jeffrey Okudah and guys like that? Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think we're going to have to see, maybe check back in midseason and see how things look. But I mean, I think that they do have potential.
So that's high praise for Hancock, considering Burke has played more. You're saying that even though Hancock hasn't necessarily shown it yet, they feel very confident that he's going to be as good, potentially, a player as Burke.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And because we did see, I mean, they had to play a true freshman last year at corner for a game with Jair Brown because they dealt with so many injuries and everything else. So, and it was so easy for fans to vilify the secondary. The secondary played so poorly. The secondary cost us this game. The secondary cost us that game. So I think memories of how well the secondary played I think it's clouded a little bit, but I mean, Burke certainly is the guy that everybody looks at as CB1. But I think Hancock and Benison are both right there too.
Okay, and does that mean Benison would be? You would think he would be the number one nickel?
Maybe. I mean, maybe you put Hancock back there. I mean, I
Okay.
think there are going to be a lot of times that they could just kind of change some things around. I mean, the reality is that as you're doing all of this, I think that you're going to also look at times where you're going to have corners in there, or safeties in there. I think Sonny Styles or Cameron Martinez could be there as well too. I think that there's a lot of cross training in terms of some of these positions. I mean, corners are corners because of the way they can flip their hips and do some things. Safeties you are often called on a lot more for run support and things along those natures. So It's not like, I can do everything out there, but certainly the nickel position is different than maybe your corners are. So, we've gone through a conversation. We haven't really gotten into safeties all that much. I should probably have just predicated all secondary talk on Sonny Styles. Sonny Styles. He is going to be an important piece to have out there. And it's not going to just be a case of when Ohio State is facing an offense that's running 12 personnel. I think we're going to see Sonny Styles out there for huge stretches of most games.
Okay. And so I see here Arled's, I guess they're using his legal name, Lorenzo, but everybody knows him as Sonny.
Lorenzo's his brother.
That's his. Okay, I just want to get that straight. Okay.
Lorenzo transfer. You guys have him listed as second team strong.
Got it.
Lorenzo was a receiver at Notre Dame. Is a year older than Sonny. Lorenzo Jr. And they're both the sons of former Buckeye great Lorenzo Styles Sr.
Okay.
But and I think Lorenzo Styles Jr. Certainly is in the depth at corner, but he's just moved back the defensive side of the ball after playing receiver for a couple of years at Notre Dame.
So Sonny is definitely going to be the big dog, is what you're saying, at safety. And then you have Ransom and Proctor as well.
Right, and I think you need to also put in Syracuse transfer Jahad Carter as well. I think that's important to mention. And I will also throw a third name in there, and that's true freshman Malik Hartford. That is, Ryan Day brought him up really unsolicited and just talked about how Malik Hartford is going to have to play this year. And I think that he has overtaken Kai Stokes in terms of the depth chart. And I remind people who are ready to sell their stock in Kai Stokes, because I say that Kai Stokes has not played a ton of defensive back. He really only moved there, I think, going into his senior year of high school. So he's somebody I would say to remain patient with. But I think that it's going to be important. Like at the free safety position, there is going to be a pretty good mixture of, as Ohio State puts on its fake depth charts. We really don't get depth charts. A lot of ors with Carter or Proctor or Hartford, and then at strong safety, Ransom or Proctor or Hartford, how they're going to be able to do it. And then again, as I've said, your nickel, I certainly like either Cam Martinez or Sonny Styles there. And then maybe in certain situations, you either see a Jordan Hancock or a Ryan Turner.
Okay, interesting. Which is why you led off by talking about it's not necessarily going to matter who's on the starting depth chart. It's going to be who's going to get more snaps, and especially when the game is on the line. And how's the kicking game looking?
Well, we know what they have with the punter. Jesse Mirko, the Australian, is back, and he's among the best in the conference, in my opinion. We did finally get a announcement on who the starting place kicker will be, and it will be Jaden Fielding beating out USC transfer Parker Lewis and walk-on Casey Magyar. And Fielding will handle kickoffs and place kicking duties. I think there still could be a case of where Lewis gets used some during the season in terms of quote unquote position battles, but going into Indiana, it is going to be Jaden Fielding. We do know that much at this point, as Ryan Day did confirm it to us earlier this week.
All right. And then wrapping up, Kevin, the schedule. You mentioned the Notre Dame game. That's the big one early on September 23rd. Have to go on the road this time. Notre Dame might even be better this year, especially more dangerous at quarterback. That's for sure. So that's going to be a huge game. Wisconsin and Michigan on the road. So those are 3 monster road games, and then Penn State at home. So this is a tough schedule this year.
Yeah, one of the services had Ohio State with the number 9 schedule in the nation in terms of strength of schedule, and I think even the ones that don't have them at 9 certainly have them in the top 20. And a lot of people are quick to be critical of Ohio State's schedule. Oh, well, you got Youngstown State, you got an FCS team. Yeah, they do. Yeah. They do, but the road games are real, the crossover games are real. This certainly is not one of Ohio State's easier schedules. And I always circle a game at Purdue, and Purdue has been, for whatever reason, Purdue has been trouble for Ohio State through the years. And while I expect this Purdue game to be a day game and not a night game, and generally the lights are on when Ohio State really has issues there, I would add that to the list of games to keep an eye on, because it's a 3-game stretch of at Purdue, home Penn State, at Wisconsin. So that. There really is not a long stretch on the schedule where you're like, well, Ohio State is going to be able to coast. I mean, I guess the longest stretch of the schedule is Indiana, Youngstown State, and Western Kentucky, because beyond that, you sit there. I would maybe say 2 at Rutgers versus Michigan State and Minnesota, but you have Michigan on the other side of that. But it's a challenging schedule, and it's kind of the opposite of the Michigan schedule, where they're playing Manny, Mo, and Jack of the Pep Boys to start their schedule. And really, the only game of consequence that Michigan has prior to Ohio State is a game against Penn State, which I think Penn State could give them a game. To be quite honest, I'm
absolutely
not ready to put my money where my mouth is on that one. But I'm just saying that it's one to keep an eye on.
I agree, and especially if their quarterback gives them everything that it's possible he could give them as a talented player and a difference maker, but we will find out. But if he is a difference maker, then yeah, I can see Penn State beating Michigan. I don't think there's any doubt about that in my mind. Will they? I don't know, but I think they've given Ohio State and Michigan trouble over the years, especially at Happy Valley. So yeah, but you're right. Michigan's got to start bulking up their schedule a little bit. Those non-conference games, I'm not sure what that's about. You can't say anything negative about Ohio State's schedule if you're a Michigan fan, that's for sure.
Right.
All right, Kevin.
In 25, I mean, we don't know what, or I guess in 24, I'm a year ahead of myself. The Ohio State's non-conference schedule is pretty poor at that point. But I think that once you sit there and you see that new schedule come out with the additions of USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon, I don't think that anybody's necessarily going to complain that much when we get divisionalists in the Big Ten, and maybe some of these games that people just kind of hold their nose up at, Rutgers, Maryland, are no longer yearly occurrences.
Yeah. No, especially those first few years, they're going to be looked at almost as non-conference games. So it's going to be like, oh, well, look at we got to play these two teams anyway. We don't need to be adding any more tough non-conference games to our schedule. It's as tough as it is in the country. So, but that's next year. Of course, the playoffs are going to expand next year as well. So one more year of trying to squeeze in to a 4-team playoff, and this is definitely going to be another big year for Ohio State, talent-wise. There's just no question about it. But it's about getting over the hump now under Ryan Day, isn't it? Ohio State, these fans, I can imagine, they want to win a championship now.
Absolutely, because Ryan Day, rightly or wrongly, is lumped in with Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel, and each of them won national championships and a boatload of Big Ten titles. And Ohio State has lost 2 straight to Michigan. And I think that, not to prolong this interview, but I think Michigan certainly was saved by COVID in 2020 in the sense that it didn't have to play Ohio State that year. Michigan was down to begin with and was down to like its 4th string quarterback, and Ohio State would have won that game by about 100 points.
Yeah.
And does Jim Harbaugh take his ball and go home at that point? The COVID year allowed them to bulk up their roster a little bit, keep some guys there an additional year, and you had a team that was much more senior laden than Ohio State was. And when it all came down to it, was tougher for each of those 2 games and was able to punch Ohio State in the mouth. And in 2021, Ohio State really didn't have an answer. In 2022, Ohio State led at halftime, but then just stopped scoring for whatever reason. So, we'll see.
Yeah. No. Well, look, they've changed their model, and like you said, it happened after COVID. But I think something popped in Jim Harbaugh's head, and I got to stop trying to be like Ohio State, the spread offense. I got to start trying to be like these. I'm not going to be able to recruit with those guys. I'm not going to be able to have those types of skill guys. I've got to be able to play the type of offense and defense that I did when I was coaching at my best, both in the pros and in college. And that's worked for him so far over the last couple of years. Sort of like last year. I think a lot of Michigan fans looked at the way that they broke down some of those big passing completions as, oh, I remember that. I remember a few years ago when Don Brown was our defensive coordinator and we were just sending the kitchen sink and playing, keeping our corners on an island, and we were getting toasted by this Ohio State offense. It's a completely different team now.
Oh, absolutely. And, again, partisans out there are going to sit there and say, oh, there goes an Ohio State homer saying this, but I think that this is kind of the end of the line this year. I think that when they lose some of these guys and they lose quorum, what does the team look like there? Because I think the recruiting numbers, when you look at them, I'm not necessarily sure that Michigan is restocking the cupboard from the prep ranks. I think Michigan has been by far the best team in the conference in terms of hitting the transfer portal for immediate fills. If you look at the offensive line and some things like that, but I don't see the roster moving forward after this 23 season that is constructed the same way. And of course, just to add a little tinfoil hat, because I like doing that with, Jim Harbaugh serving a 3-game self-imposed suspension. The NC2A, allegedly they negotiated potentially a 4-game suspension, and then Michigan comes back with a 3-game suspension. I think that the NC2A has some more punishment in mind once we get through the year or whatever. Does Jim Harbaugh sit there and say, I'm out after this year? So, something else to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Every year you're going to hear the same thing, and unless he does leave for the NFL or not. I don't think that's ever going to go away. Kevin, I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again during the season, because I'm sure this is going to be another big season. So there's going to be some big games to talk about. And again, the description area of this video, you can check out all the links, including, of course, the website, the podcast, and everything else that you guys do, Kevin. And I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time here on the Our Lads Football Network.